This is episode 1 of the Must Make podcast. I'm Jack. How's it going? Hi. For those of you who've got no fucking idea who Jack is, I'm one half of Spectrasol. We're a UK-based electronic music duo. Been going for about 10 years and a bit. And I'm now working on this project called Workforce, which is me on my own. This podcast, it was a long time in the making. I've been thinking about doing it for ages. Broadly, it's going to be about creative process. It's something I'm super interested in, and it doesn't seem to get a lot of attention from music journalists or creative journalists at all, really. So I thought it'd be pretty cool to maybe just have some conversations about the topic and see if we can get into some territory that hasn't been covered before. So the idea really is to not focus on the tools that people use to make creative stuff, but to look at the processes, the routines and the mindsets of creative people. First off, we're going to just be tapping into some of my peers. Hopefully we'll expand it out to some other non-music types. And we're going to find out what makes them tick, what's driving them, and really drill down into their mentality. And I just want to know how they set their lives and workspaces and other routines up to achieve their results. And the idea is really that I don't have all the answers. It's just to go on an exploration and work out how people work and how people tick and how people get their results. The processes will differ for every person, and it's basically hopefully going to be a learning experience for everyone involved, me, the guest, and you, the listener. So the very first guest I've got is Darren White AKA d.Bridge. He's been releasing music since the mid-90s as part of Bad Company and Future Forces before he went solo and became d.Bridge. His label Exit is one of the most diverse and eclectic labels you're likely to find, and we met in about 2008 when me and Dave as Spectrasol were working on a 12-inch single for Darren and his Exit Records label, and we've just remained friends ever since, really. We talk music, we talk production, we talk direction, we bitch about everything else. More recently, I guess you may have seen that I, as Workforce, just released an EP with Darren on Exit Records. It's a little 6-track EP. Go check that out. Plug. So anyway, Darren was always going to be the first guest for me on this discussion because I know he thinks about this stuff a lot and quite deeply. And anyway, what resulted was a really wide-ranging and quite in-depth and personal, more personal than I thought actually, but very personal discussion. And the time flew. Basically, we talked for about 2 hours. I've managed to edit it down a little bit so it's more palatable. And we ended up in some seriously off the beaten track territory that I didn't think we would get to at all. So let's get into it. So this is episode 1. We've got d.Bridge on the line from Antwerp. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, man. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I've got this ragtag setup. And some
We've got to start somewhere.
I know, mate. And that was the thing. I just thought, let's just go for it and see where the conversation goes. I remember talking to you about it first of all, ages ago. And I think you forgot, didn't you? We were in a cafe and I made loads of notes.
Really?
Yeah. I played a gig in... I can't remember where I was. I think I'd played at Star Wars or something, somewhere in Belgium. Steam. I played at Steam.
Okay.
And then I took the train over to Antwerp and you picked me up in your car and you just learned to drive, if I remember correctly.
Oh, right.
Do you remember that? And we went to this sort of Scandinavian breakfast spot and had this weird cream cheese salmon on toast thing. And I started
Do you know what? It's weirdly, I vaguely remember it, but at the same time, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. Christ, my memory's terrible. I do remember that, and I'm trying to think where that is, though. It
was kind of near-ish to Antwerp station, if I remember correctly, because I remember coming out and you picked me up. But I came out the top bit, not the downstairs.
Yeah.
And you were on a main road and you had to pull in. Anyway, yeah, this is thrilling. But basically, yeah. So like I sent you over the thing of like the what I want to try and get at with these conversations really, and it's not it's not like I'm not really. I think there's loads of emphasis placed on producers and creatives about like what tools they use, and sort of what in our world it's like compressors and EQs and like how do you get that snare to sound like that. But I've never really been that interested in that.
No, I'm not as well.
How do you feel about like if you were to ask your sort of favorite producers or creatives or anything really, any creative person, any questions, what do you reckon you'd ask them?
Well, it's weird. It's kind of like I think that's with the advent of how things are now, that question has changed. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like I'm asking my peers like, how are you doing things, rather than like you say, the actual physical act of like, how are you doing that to that, rather than how do you get to that. Do you know what I mean? So it's like the whole thing of like it's always been known. I always say I hate mixing, and it's not something that I'm good at, and I just feel that's something that gets in the way. It does get in the way of my creativity, which I find really frustrating.
But if you're now asking people like how to do things like mix wise and that side of things, does that mean that you now have sort of more confidence in your creative ability, and all you need sort of help with is how to make that creative ability sound better?
Yeah and no, because it's kind of like this. It's like sometimes I worry that because I have to think about these sort of sonics, that side of it, it's making me second guess my choices in what I'd like and what I'd use. Do you know what I mean? And how I'd go about using them. It's almost like I'd rather just be not worry about whether there's frequencies clashing in certain things, but I just want to get on with it, and then have to think about that later. It's almost like the creative part of making music is being interrupted by the sonics and the how-tos of things. Do you know what I mean? And that's where I kind of struggle.
But this is this is why I've become way more interested. I mean, I've always been sort of more interested in creative process than the actual tools people use and the methods to get things like loud or punchy or whatever, because all that stuff can be done later. And that's why we've almost got to this point now in our little world where that's so important. And so we've almost lost the artistry side of it, in the sense of people making sacrifices for sound rather than for good music.
Well, yeah, it's like that whole thing of like, using like basses that are outside the key of F or something, because that's what sonically cuts through on the sound system. It's just like I don't want to have to think about that. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want those things to determine my choices.
Yeah.
And that's I can't get my I can't get my head around.
And to be totally honest with you, like that's why like I think it's a really interesting time, because this conversation about trying to almost do away with those restrictions opens up a more interesting conversation about what it is you're trying to achieve. And like, mix aside, because now you can't tell me that people 20 years ago really were that concerned with how loud or punchy, or our culture is about sound system, and so things do have to sound good on there, but there's lots of people who don't spend much time on their engineering and their tunes sound great. Like your tunes sound great, so because they're done in a certain way. So it's not, for me, it's like so many people have had the handcuffs put on in terms of like all the technical
I think it's
stuff.
a weird one. I've thought about it, and I do wonder, because I've kind of grown up from working with people and working in studios that did in some cases have engineers. So there was that person there who was able to deal with those, issues that I might not necessarily have had to think about. For example, like when I used to, like in like 96, 97, working with Nico and No U-Turn, and he was the boards guy. He was the guy on the mixing desk, on the with the all the outboard effects and all that kind of stuff. He was that guy, while everyone else was just kind of like, get your samples together, and create get a palette of sounds, and it's almost like I'll make it good.
I feel like that was like partly to do with the fact that there wasn't really a race for loudness and stuff, you know, like you had much more room to play with, I guess, in that era.
And at the same time, you also had the mastering engineer before it went to doing their job. Do you know what I mean? It's like we as engineers in sort of mastering, quote unquote, were kind of taken out of the equation, because, you know, the whole advent of CDJs and burning things to CDs and playing files wasn't around then. So there was someone there to sort of sculpt the sound somewhat. Do you know what I mean? Towards the medium. So therefore, probably cleaned up some of the problems that may have been there. You know,
I think it's really funny that. And I don't know whether this will be the case with every one of these that I do, but it's funny that the first subject we go into is always the technical. Do you know what I mean? It's the same with whenever I talk to anyone, like any of our peers who I'm like either talking to about a problem I've got or whatever. It's always you sort of you revert back to talking about how to achieve a sonic goal rather than a creative goal.
Well, I think that's always been some part and parcel, especially of D&B. Do you know what I mean? It's always been part and parcel, because it is like, in terms of as a music, it pushed technology, and that kind of goes in hand with it. It was like, you know, we pushed samplers to their limits, and what, you know, just the way doors and the arrangements and things like that. So it's kind of like, it's always been part of the landscape of drum and bass. So the technical aspect of it, but now it's almost like, now there's almost like a level playing field, in the sense of like everything's in the box. There's these other sort of mountains and hills to be climbed, and, you know what I mean, sort of you have to be the master of this aspect of the technology. Do you know what I mean?
I find that, but I think again that's like, to go back to what I said, I think I said it earlier, is that where you've, like, the playing field, as you said, is almost leveled and everyone's got access to pretty much every bit of software and every sample pack, it means that you can now, to differentiate yourself, go back to really working on sound and process. And that's the part of it that I'm super interested in. So like, I've never been one for music that's really, really sounds amazing, but it's kind of devoid of ideas and progression and sort of interesting stuff. Like, and I think I mean, you'd have to tell me if you're wrong, if I'm wrong, but I think, like, from the music that you put out and the music you make, that's all. I always find that, even with, like, so for example, when you and I were putting the Workforce EP together, I would say, oh, I've made a tweak to this and I've made a tweak to that, and you'd be like, you're overthinking, just leave it. And that's me being suffering from that sort of problem of feeling like things constantly need to be tweaked. But again, I feel like that's part of the creative struggle. It's like you sometimes do that stuff to procrastinate. And even when it came to recording this with you, I said, oh, let's not do Monday because I want to do this, that and the other. But really, it was because part of me is worried about, you know, taking the plunge and starting.
Yeah, we're we're always getting in our own way. Do you know what I mean? I do it all the time, kind of like get in my own way, find excuses not to do things, or feel like, it's like that whole thing of, you know, feeling like you need this bit of equipment to achieve this, you know what I mean, your ultimate goal. And really, I could just get on, you know, with just a laptop, I could do everything. Do you know what I mean? But I choose to think, right, no, I need this bit of equipment and I need that. And it is just these hurdles and obstacles that you put in your way. And I'm starting to sort of see that I do have that problem, and I'm getting better at it, at dealing with it, I think. But it's still a problem for me, and I'm not sure what it is, whether it's kind of why I'm getting in my own way. Do you know what I mean? What is it? And I think some of it comes down to, I don't know. I think I just enjoy the art of making music, and the other side of it bugs me. Do you know what I mean? The side of actually having to put it out and have people listen to it and all that. I don't care about that. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like I'm creating these obstacles so I don't have to do that.
But don't you think the irony of that is that self-indulgent music making makes the best music? So it's like, when you're being self-indulgent and really allowing yourself to do whatever you want, that's when you make the best stuff. And arguably that's when it's like, you have said fuck all the listeners and fuck everything else. I'm just going to get on with it, and if I like it, I like it. But arguably, it's weird because those ones are always the best ones. So they're the ones that you almost feel more. I always feel more comfortable with those where I'm like, I love that one, can't wait to put it out, and I don't care what anyone thinks. So it's weird how those two things, like for me anyway, go hand in hand in terms of being able to let go. So I guess that brings me on to an interesting part of the conversation, or a part of the conversation I wanted to touch on anyway, which is like, do you have any sort of routines or practices on a creative day that would help you get into like the right mindset or the right sort of headspace? Because a lot, like routine's quite important, but equally breaking a routine could help you to come up with something different, or push yourself somewhere else.
I think, do you know what I mean? If it's changed for me, do you know what I mean? As in, if I look at my life of making music and career of making music, that has changed, and I've had to adapt. The fact that I'm a father now and I've got 2 kids, and I have to, work around those sort of parameters now. Whereas before I could kind of go in all day, all night, and just tweak and twiddle and to my heart's content. And you know what I mean? It's like I have to be more committed in some respects, and I can go for weeks just working on ideas, getting little loops up and things like that, and nothing comes. And then it's like suddenly there'll be like a day or just a couple hours where something sort of comes together. So I've had to kind of learn to adjust to that. And I think that's for me, that's been really sort of difficult and getting my head around, because music is always, for me, in some respects, been about, there's a certain amount of freedom. Do you know what I mean? So, but I no longer have the same freedom that I used to have with making music. So I've had to sort of realign how that freedom, and that's where I kind of like that kind of, because because it's also my job as well, that there's this really hard balancing act of kind of like making music for me, for my sake, and then making music to be able to create work and so on and so forth. And I think that's the struggle that I have at the moment, and I'm still working out.
Okay, look, there's 2 angles there that I think are really interesting. One is like the battle of the creative within the framework of like what's considered valuable, and like you have to do this to make a living, to continue to be able to continue to do the art. So you're constantly towing the line between what's commercially going to make you enough money to continue making and what you love to make. So there's that side of it that I know we all struggle with. All creative people, I imagine, struggle with it. So I wonder if you could like elaborate a bit on how difficult you find that sometimes.
Well, I think in some respects that the choices that I've made over the years have given me an extra sort of layer of freedom in terms of like my direction. Is kind of like I've not committed myself to say a sound or a certain, do you know what I mean, or certain expectations. It's kind of like I've, whether it's through Exit, my label, or through my own releases, I've given myself that freedom that I can explore where I want. So that I'm lucky in that sense. Do you know what I mean? But I also recognize that, I do have a label that, that I do have to kind of, push artists and promote artists and play their music and so on and so forth. So that's been, for me, that's been a personal battle that I've had to deal with over the last year, especially, whereby, I left my previous agency because I just felt that it was getting in the way of my own personal happiness and direction as a producer, because I do see myself as a producer first over a DJ. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I wanted to be able to stay true to what I want to do, and hope and deliver sort of my music to the world that's uncompromising. You know what I mean? In my own world, and because I don't know, I've kind of seen in some respects how, you know, life can get in the way of things and life can dictate what happens with people's music, and I've never wanted that, or not even, it's I don't know, I suppose internally is quite scared of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Being kind of like, oh shit, I've got to do these foghorn things now because that's what everyone wants. Do you know what I mean?
Do you think unfortunately that being a creative person means you have to be, there's a horrible way to put it, but it's like you have to be quite selfish in the sense of you know, like, for example, the reason this I've called this like Must Make, and my label I called Must Make as a result, is because when I really thought and drilled down into like what I'm about and who I am and all that sort of stuff, I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't make music or have some sort of fulfillment of some fulfilling outlet of creative something. It's like, that sounds really awful and quite selfish, but it is quite.
Well, no, it's not really. It's just kind of like, you know, I don't know anything else personally. It's like, this is what I've kind of like trained all my life to be. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is what.
And again, that's the interesting part for me, is that, and this is what I want to get into really, is like, since you've been, you know, like, since all people who are professional creatives have trained, they're basically, like you said, they've spent their hours doing it and they are training to do this thing. Like, that training teaches you sort of, I guess, rhythms and patterns and lifestyle choices that you can make to really help optimize the time that you spend creating. So when you said, for example, that you really have to be careful and like you're selective with your time because of your family commitments, what can you do, like, or what do you do where you've got that spare bit of time? Like, if you really had to cut to the nitty gritty and you've got only a few hours and you really want to try and get something down and make the most of that time, what would be like either things that you do to prepare for that time, or like what would be the first thing you'd think about doing in that time to really optimize the use of it?
What were the first things I do? Do you know what? It's like, I think it's the same way. Like I say, that you almost that training that you've given yourself over these years is kind of like, it's like I'm almost like tuned in to a certain frequency, if you want, of what it is I like. It's like I know instantly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What if I like that snare? If I like that chord? So it's like, as I'm going through sounds and flicking, it's like you can just know straight away. So it's almost like I do think that I do have my own sonic palette. It's exclusive to me, I think, and I'm pretty sure other people must have it as well. Do you know what I mean? It's like you kind of like, you've got. That's why that whole thing of like things have to hit in a certain way, or, you know, this snare or whatever, this frequency that I never got with that. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's like the science and maths of it doesn't appeal to me. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I want to know what if I have a direct connection to that sound.
Yeah.
So
if you, I guess, yeah. So if you know when you hear a sound, or you've made a synth patch or whatever, and you're working, if you know what you're looking to achieve, does that sort of mean that you know what you're trying to communicate? And if you do, what is it?
Do I know what I'm trying to communicate? I don't I'm not sure if I necessarily know what I'm trying to communicate. I'm just kind of like, there's this inner voice that you're trying to give an outer voice to. Do you know what I mean? Through these selections of sounds and the way you put things together.
Is it like a mood, maybe, rather than a specific idea? Because I know, obviously, you sing and write lyrics as well, so that's a very different component. But but when you're not using lyrics, for example, I'm guessing there's some, like, it's the same for me too. Really, I know when I'm auditioning sounds that I know what mood I'm trying to get inside of, and like convey, and sometimes it's a feeling as well. So it's like an actual physical feeling where you're thinking, if I play this in a certain environment, it will actually have a physical effect on someone's body, in the sense of that it might be a really low note, or some physical.
I think it's just I'm trying to stimulate a physical effect within myself. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, that's what I'm looking for. Like, that's why I'm drawn to certain songs or drawn to certain sounds. It's like I noticed that, especially because I used to work with samples, and that's where I've had to kind of learn with synths, because obviously there's a certain amount of things are tuned and everything's nice and on point. But I like to use things that modulate and pitch and change and drift the tuning of things, because I don't like things to be dead on. Do you know what I mean? I like that kind of slightly disconcerting, sort of not quite in settled. Do you know what I mean? Tones and things like that. So
I guess that leads me to an interesting question, which is, what is your relationship with imperfection? And I guess that does relate to the mix aspect of things as well. Like,
I think imperfection is I think that's something, in some ways, it's like I never really realized about it until, I used to talk with my brother, and, we used, especially when coming from drums and from breaks, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like he was always trying to like program imperfection, do you know what I mean? Human error and things like that into the drums, and like that, and that's where swing and all that kind of things, if you listen to, for example, like Dilla, and just the placements of the snares and all these, it's those imperfections that give something a groove or a swing, so to speak. So
sounds
it's like,
human, doesn't it? It sounds like imperfect.
Exactly. Imperfect, and that's and I've always sort of been drawn to that, and I think it's like with the sounds that I like and the samples that I think there's kind of like these, especially as some of like the pads and stuff that I sampled, there's lots of like harmonics and all these things sort of clashing and working within each other, and the fact that I've taken it off a record and there might be a slight drift in the sample in terms of from the recording of it, or I think like one record that I had, which for me had a mistake, like True Romance has had a mistake in it, and the mistake that was in it I cleaned up in the VIP, and it was weird. It's kind of like I kind of wished I hadn't done it at the same time with the VIP, but that mistake it's only something that I can hear, and I don't think anyone really else would know what it is, but it's there, and I'm okay with it. Do you know what I mean? But I felt like, again, like it felt like, oh, maybe I need to fix that, and then there was that instant regret at having fixed it.
Do you know what? I was thinking about this when I was writing shitloads of notes for the overall feel of what I wanted to do with these conversations, and I remembered when I was thinking about imperfection, do you remember when, you probably don't, but it was maybe in 2009, me and Dave and you went down to Bo's studio to master the Melodies and Insignia 12, and I remember I brought my laptop with me because I had the project file on it, and this is how basic it was. I remember Bo was listening to the master, and there was like a click or something in it, like where I hadn't done a fade or something, and I remember you pulling us up and going, what the fuck, like what's that, like you need to get rid of that, and me like opening up the project file, doing a fade on the, like I would never do this now because there's so much stuff on my master file that it just wouldn't work, and like fading a little imperfection click and then sending a new pre-master back to Bo while we were in the studio together. So it's
I do have an issue with clicks.
Yeah, but like there's so much music that I love that where they leave it in for like effect, and it's like, I remember seeing like Addison Groove somewhere in London playing, and he was playing on I think he was like on a real drum machine, and it was a live show, and the whole thing fell apart, and I was just like, this is fucking great, because at least there is a chance that this whole thing could fall apart, and therefore it makes the whole thing far more special, doesn't it? Because it's like, he's holding it together, and everyone now knows that how easy it could all fall apart, and he's still making it so it kind of fit. And it's like, that for me is where the magic in creation is where there's like, you've left human mistakes in, and like that says more about it than it than it just being absolutely perfect.
It's like those things when you're actually, with making music. So I'm a big fan of like, retrospective recording and capture last takers recording as well, because it's like you capturing those moments. Do you know what I mean? That you don't necessarily, where you're not thinking about it, you're just doing it. Do you know what I mean? It's like those things are important in terms of catching a vibe. That's so.
Just for people who might not know what capture last take is, do you want to maybe just explain what that is?
Okay, so like most DAWs, I think, not all of them, but I know like Cubase and Logic is always recording in the background, recording MIDI, or basically always recording MIDI in the background. So because for me, like when I've worked out a melody, so to speak, hit record, it's like, right, perform. Do you know what I mean? And it's almost like I freeze up, and it's kind of like I'm always going to make mistakes. So I'd rather just kind of like have the loop going, playing, keep playing, and then it's like, shit, yeah, that was sick. Capture it. Do you know what I mean? And then you've got that part there. So it's kind of like a lot of my stuff is built that way as well. It's like I use Bitwig now, and using it's got like it's clip launch, like Ableton with clips and stuff like that. So I use the same thing where I'll just keep going, recording until I find the bit, until you find that bit that you connect with. But yeah, so I think it's those capturing those imperfections are especially with electronic music. It's kind of like it's what you were saying about it's like that human error. It's needed. And that's where still my biggest problem is today. Kind of the science is sort of overtaking the feeling of what we're doing.
But I think maybe that speaks to the mentality of like creatives though, because I feel like creative people are quite sensitive in the sense that you can be affected by external elements that you're not like with, like the idea that it's somehow imposed upon you by external factors that you have to sort of adhere to certain scientific and mix goals is bullshit. And I think a lot of people feel that pressure. I definitely do, but it's don't you think it's like it's almost on us to sort of be like, actually all of that stuff can, if you decide you don't want to get things as loud as the loudest piece of music out there, or as like punchy, and that isn't what you're going for, and it's much more important about like communicating your idea, surely that sort of supersedes all the other shite. Like surely you're if you're anything like me, and I think like all of us have some similarities. It's like your favorite sessions that you've done, or your favorite piece of music that you've finished. Usually, you didn't spend much time thinking about the technicalities of it. It's fallen into place.
Well, the problem the thing that for me, the way that I'm to answer that problem from my own point of view is I'm having to disregard everyone else. Do you know what I mean? So it's to the point of like, now that's why I'm doing a live project, or it's like, because I do have to think about the performance side of things, to create work for myself. So for me to then be able to not worry about all of that, I'm going to go out and do a live thing where this is all, at least there's a consistency to how shit it sounds.
Because it's all yours. Yeah, I get,
because it's all mine.
Yeah. So that was the energy behind you doing a live show, was thinking that if I just play all my own music, it will sonically stand up against each other because you've made it. Is that right?
Yeah, because there's a consistency to all of it. Do you know what I mean? It's like with when you do an album, there's a consistency, and there's a kind of like a constant theme. Do you know what I mean? And then maybe the DJ or the person on after me, they might have a better sonics, but for my section, there was a cohesiveness to it.
Yeah. Well,
do you know what I mean?
Okay, so for you, for example, like your music, you could hand it over to anyone, or like another engineer. You could like just relieve yourself of all the stress by just saying, I'm going to write it, someone else can work out how to make this sound sonically really, really good. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, that's something I'd love to be in that position. that is like, I think, in terms of like ideal worlds, is I'd never have to DJ or perform, and I can just write the tune and give it to someone. Well, a lot of people I've worked with, I could call it MIG, make it good. Do you know what I mean? And it's like that. That's an ideal scenario for me, but it will I know it will kind of never happen. So I at least have to kind of give my music a fighting chance. Do you know what I mean? If I want it to be played in those spaces and arenas.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But I can't compete. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want to, and I don't want to have to compete. So I'd rather kind of find a space where I can do what I do and be happy with it, be happy with the imperfections that I know that are there, and not have them highlighted. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
By
putting them up against someone else's tune. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, in some respects, yeah. And I think it's I'm okay with that. Do you know what I mean? I'm okay that person is a better engineer than me, or that person can make their stuff. But I just know that what I do has my own voice, and it's different. It's just there's this other playing field that we are all involved in that I don't necessarily want to play on.
Yeah. So I guess what, like, the overarching thing within the context of this conversation, that sounds like a really arty-farty way of saying it. I'm basically just saying, sort of like, broadly from a creative standpoint, you feel like you can't make a certain genre of music because you don't have the ability to mix it to the sonic benchmark that you think is set.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah, definitely. And I'm okay with that.
I just think it's a shame because it's a shame that thing has become such an important part of creative process. Like, and that's why I asked you about imperfection, is because, like, no, why should anyone be striving for perfection? You'll always fail. Like, you're never going to get something that's perfect, and that's why I think.
Well, yeah, it's all subjective, obviously, but at the same time, it's kind of like we're all, we're playing on these huge, great, bloody systems, and it is like you can tell when something just bangs. Do you know what I mean?
But again, it's like, is that the goal? Like, is that what we're aiming for now? Is that the only goal we have with what we're doing?
Well, yeah, it's for a lot of people, definitely, because it's like where everyone's just kind of like, there's all these tricks, aren't there, that people employ to kind of.
But we are, like, I feel like for some reason there's a pressure to, like, adhere to the way that people do their work, but surely, and this is something I think we've discussed about another topic, but on another day, I should say, we should be, like, offering the alternative, like.
Yeah, definitely.
I know you already do that. It's not fair to say that you don't already do that. But I mean, I hate the idea that you're put off making a certain sort of music that I'm sure you still love because you don't feel you can get to a certain point, like, engineering wise.
But I don't know. It's just kind of like, before it was like, I've always seen myself in some ways as the alternative. Do you know what I mean? It's like when the kind of big, D&B was at this kind of, charting in the, all this kind of, charting and blah, blah, blah. I was okay with it. Do you know what I mean? It's because, like, that's cool because I need that to be there for me to be the alternative.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So that's always been a kind of like this factor of what I do. I'm okay with any kind of sort of subgenre or within the scenes because I can be the alternative. Do you know what I mean? In terms of mass appeal kind of thing. But now there's, like I say, we're talking about this sort of another side of making music that's come into play. That I can't. I don't know whether I can be the. Can my shit mixes be the alternative to? It's like,
and I guess, to be fair, like, that is what most creatives. I guess, like, historically, creative people, when they see a change in something that they don't like, they move on and just do something else. Don't they?
So rather than me sort of keep battling that battling that. Why put myself through that? Do you know what I mean? So then I need to find myself a space where I can be happy with but be happy with my lot and where and what it is that I do and how I do it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm sure I could, in some ways, I'm sure I could get to a stage where it competes, but I almost feel like I'd have to make certain sacrifices in terms of my tones or my sound choices and things like that, because, you know, mathematically that snare isn't quite, you know, it's like, I've given my mixes to people and it's like, oh yeah, there's a bit of, you're missing some of this frequency. I'm like, well, okay. So in my head, I'm like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do to fill that? Because I'm okay with it as it is.
Can I just, like, you just saying that gives me a horrid sinking feeling in my guts. It's like, this is bullshit. This is fucking bullshit. And we shouldn't be aiming for, like, full spectrum. You're missing that there. It's fucking bullshit. And it's like,
but that is there though. That is the, you know, there's everyone's using the, you know, the pink noise curve and using, it's just like, when all that shit came in, it was like, for fuck's sake, I don't know about that, and I don't care about that. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't want this line, this outline to dictate how my music should be made. Yeah. I suppose in some ways that's why I've always enjoyed collaborating with people as well, because it's kind of like people being in this, like, people working to their strengths. Do you know what I mean? And there's that symbiotic relationship and understanding of what both of you are doing.
Yeah. Does being in a room with someone who you might think is like a better engineer, does that take the stress off you in a session to allow you to sort of free you up a bit more creatively?
Oh yeah, massively.
Okay, so that is a positive for you in terms of that dynamic and that feeling of, I hate to use this word, mate, but inadequacy with the mix stuff. Do you know what I mean? Because I get this. I have to be honest. Like, I get the same. Like I beat myself up about mixes big time. Like, and I think this is part of the process. And I guess there's a couple of areas I want to drill down into a bit more. But one of them is about the mentality of letting go when you're done. And one of those things that I think a lot of producers do, is a lot of creatives do, is they will sit back and pick at the work and pick at the mix or the arrangement or the certain sounds. So I wonder what your relationship is once you think you've finished a piece of music, like how long you would sort of sit with it and what your process might look like, and how stressful or how easily you can let go of stuff once it's done or once you think it's done.
It's always been hard to let go. Again, it's something that you learn to do and you learn to get better with. You know, I've got mixes I've got tunes that are years old that I'm still working on the mixes. Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, the only reason that I'm still working on the mix is because they don't stand up to what's going on today. So in some respect, the tune's done. Do you know what I mean? It's just that there's this extra layer of something that needs to be thought about that's getting in the way of kind of letting it go.
So is your only fear of letting it go to do with the mix, or is the mix sort of like a substitute for potentially you not being completely happy with it? Do you know what I mean?
I think to actually for the last 5, 6, maybe 10 years, I think just the mix has got in the way of me letting go. I'm happy with the tune. The tune's arranged. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing in terms of arrangement and the actual where everything is and all that. Nothing needs to be done.
So it's definitely not a case of this tune's done, but the mix is stopping me to put it out. It is literally the mix that's stopping you. It's not the fact that there's like some other fear of putting it out into the world. It is literally just the mix.
No. Yeah, it's just a mix.
That's just like, yeah. I mean, it's mad that we've got here, innit? Like, I remember just sticking a bit crusher on the master when I was like 20, and that would be it. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't even limit anything, just send it off. And it's just like, I think that's like part of the reason why I wanted to do these conversations as well, is to try and bring some focus back to the fact that there is a lot of artistry and creative process that's kind of getting forgotten because so many people are just so hung up on like mixes, and I mean, especially in our world, I do want to sort of open these conversations up eventually, like, but obviously it's easy at the minute for me to just chat to people I know, like, straight away. But
Yeah.
you know, what other barriers are there? Like, why do we have this shit? It's like, it's not. I mean, just think how much music you could have put out if you weren't hung up on, or if there wasn't this imposition on a mix. Do you know what I mean?
I've got loads, mate.
But that's the thing. That's the thing. It's mad, isn't it? Don't you think it's fucking mad? And it's like, most people, the only people who might even critique a mix are just other engineers. So really, or other producers. So if you put that aside and just don't worry what anyone else thinks in your peer group and just go ahead, it feels to me like if you just go for it, like no punter's going to be like, oh, that mix is a bit shit, so I won't.
Yeah. Well, like, again, that's you know, that's something that's been building up for so long for me, which is why I had to make these sort of decisions on how I present what I do now.
Yeah.
So I don't have kind of those concerns are no longer in the way for me.
Yeah. So I get so when I said a minute ago about, you know, when people see things not, and they don't like them in the world that they're in, they just sort of go off and do something else. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the risk that you took in terms of taking a sideways step to do a live show, and how you sort of deal with risk taking in your process generally. I know that was a big sort of gamble for you to sort of, for those who don't know, Darren's like doing this sort of extra live show with drum pedals and synthesizers and no computer. Am I right?
Yeah, no computer.
And obviously within our little world and within electronic music anyway, that's obviously quite a big undertaking, and obviously quite risky for you too. Not creatively, because I guess risks have to be taken, but financially, and that is again the balance. So I guess, like, how do you approach risk within your work, and do you just, at what point do you think, oh fuck it, I'm going to take a punt on this or a punt on that?
Well, I think for me, it boiled down to literally my own personal happiness. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like I could quite easily. Gigs were coming in, and I was out there doing however X amount a week, blah blah blah. But I was ultimately wasn't happy because I wasn't able to kind of. I suppose in some ways there's that selfish angle was I wasn't truly be able to express myself because I wasn't able to play any of my own music. So I'm at home in the week making all this stuff, going out on a weekend, never playing it, having all this other great music to play, which is wicked. But there's this one side of me which that is kind of like I couldn't reconcile. Do you know what I mean? This unhappiness within it. And so it's almost like what do I need to do if I want to continue to do this? I need to be happy in what I'm doing. But I also recognize at the same time that, yeah, there is the financial risk of kind of like just turning all those gigs down and the ability to make that money in favor of trying something that might not work. And, and again, it was something, I had to, I spoke to my wife about, and she could see that I wasn't happy. Do you know what I mean? And she was kind of like, she was behind me 100%, because it's kind of like that happiness that I feel from going out on the weekend will seep through to the happiness for the rest of the week. Do you know what I mean? Sure. She doesn't want me coming back from the weekend and just being sort of sulking and like being morose about the gigs that I've just done, and then leading up into the next weekend, like, oh God, I've got, you know what I mean? So
dreading it rather than enjoying it.
Yeah, dreading it, right? Yeah, enjoying it. So it's kind of like I needed to do something about that. So I think just doing the working on the live thing and knowing that it's 100% me, my sound, my music. It was like it gave me kind of like, well, this is in some way this is me truly representing myself finally. And if people, I don't know, it's kind of like I like the idea of people coming along with me for that period of time and immersing in my world as I see it. Do you know what I mean? As I hear it, and it was, I don't know, it was something that I haven't really. I'm envious of people like Caliber and people like, like Skeppy and, yourself, Nina. You're getting to a stage where you can literally play a set of all your own music.
Mm.
And I like the idea of that. I know some people don't, but I like the idea of that because it's like, that's you representing you within an hour of a whole night.
But I guess what I would say to that really, and it's sort of a question and a statement, is that like you have to have worked a little bit on, and this isn't me telling you how to do it, absolutely not. It's me saying like what I feel like I've had to do with me is to really work on how I react to everyone else and work on how much impact people's reception can have on me and my own confidence in what I'm doing. And it's so I guess like I've really just started to think a lot more recently that I don't really give a fuck what most people think. And again it goes back to your point about personal happiness being super important in terms of being able to do a good job. So that would be like the sort of outline of what I'm going to ask, which is, are there any sort of personality traits within your identity that you're conscious of or that you've worked on that have helped you to make difficult, risky, or positive decisions at any point really throughout your career? I know taking the step to do a live show was a big one, but I'm imagining there's some major points in your creative life where you've had to take chances, risks, or have a punt on yourself. And I wonder what like personality traits you can identify in yourself that maybe other people could work on to sort of like foster that confidence or do you know what I mean? I know that's a difficult question because it's like it's not something that everyone thinks about all day every day, but I just wonder whether you know.
Well, no, I think for me it's just like I dread the idea, the thought of going through the motions of just being unhappy in the job that you do. Do you know what I mean? Because I see, I think we're really lucky that with what I do, like that whole sort of like get paid to see the world, basically. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, so what have you got to be miserable about? Well, do you know what I mean? It's at the same time.
Again, that's something we need to get into really, because I feel like so many people look at it and they go, there's this whole DJs complaining thing, because they look at it and they think, oh, what have you got to moan about? But actually, for me, and I guess lots of people, there's so much time where you're agonising over the music you're going to play, the music you've made, what changes you need to make to that music, how you're going to get it to the fans you want it to go to, whether it's, the reaction of people. There's so many things that sound like, like those aren't really big problems. You're being a travelling DJ. But really, there's a lot of things that are very difficult to deal with on a day-to-day. Creatively, depending on how invested you are creatively, like
no, definitely. I was like, when I for example with the early sort of like Bad Company, when we sort of decided to split up kind of thing, again that was a transitional point for me as well. Before I started Exit, it was like I'm in, Dan had kind of gone off and done his Breakbeat Chaos or whatever it was called, and then there was me, Jay and Mick left, and Bad Company was still a name that was still a bookable name. And even towards the end of it, when Dan was still there, it was kind of like I was finding that I was one of four voices, but a voice that wasn't really being heard, and I just wasn't happy. Do you know what I mean? But I'm in this great position of earning really, really good money and hating it. So it was like, that was like, what the fuck? Kind of like, what? How can you? It's like, you're doing really well. What have you got to complain about, kind of thing? But at the same time, there was just like this underlying, and I think it's just my own personal experience, my own personal traits, where it's kind of like that isn't important to me. The fact that we're doing really well and how successful I am is kind of like, it's like I want to be happy with what I'm doing. So, it was like, oh no, I need to.
So do you think that's been a theme like throughout your decisions? So, for example, like you've just said, you moved from the idea of doing loads of dBridge DJ sets to doing dBridge live show because you weren't happy, and you've just said that you weren't sort of like super happy with what you were making and DJing as Bad Company, so you made that bold decision to be happy. So it seems like those decisions, if they're completely driven by you feeling happy, then that's like, that is an ultimate goal, isn't it? That's like everything you do is to those ends. So anything that's not
I think so.
You know?
Yeah, I think so. Just in terms of my life and the things that have happened to me, and the things that, my experiences growing up as a kid, and where I am, kind of the search for happiness is like it is an ongoing theme. Do you know what I mean? And then weirdly now, I think another aspect of kind of like where sometimes music making now has become harder in some respects is because I am happy with my family and things like that. It's like,
that's so ironic, isn't it? It's so
I know. It's like because when it's like I don't sing anymore. It's because I've got nothing to complain or moan about. Do you know what I mean? If you listen to all my songs or with the songs I stuff, it's like there's this real sort of melancholy to it all, and there's this search to kind of answer a question or resolve an issue that this kind of in my life, and I don't have that anymore. Do you know what I mean?
So that begs the question, Darren. Is being a creative person compatible with being happy? Like, or do you feel like,
is it compatible?
For
some people, it is definitely.
So, like, let me rephrase that maybe. So, I would say being a creative person brings me some of the greatest joys that I've ever had, but it's also brought me some of like the worst, most crippling anxieties and fears and depression. So, it's like what you're almost saying is like, I've sort of completed it because I'm happy, and therefore, like, do you know what I mean? Like, if that's your goal, your overall goal, but then almost by exposing and opening yourself up to being a creative still, are you sort of risking that happiness?
I don't know. I think it's like, music. I think I said I make music for my own reasons. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and the outside world isn't a reason. Do you know what I mean? So if I've had a shit day or a shit week at home, or like the kids have like wound me up, or do you know what I mean? And me and the missus have had an argument. Music is this outlet for me. Do you know what I mean? And making music, and I can use it in that way. Do you know what I mean? So it's like
therapy, like a therapeutic thing.
Yeah, it is. It is therapy in a lot of ways.
Do you think you're addicted to making music? Or do you think, let me say that more broadly, do you think you're addicted to making stuff?
I'm addicted.
Do you like, could you like, if you go a long period of time without either making music or taking photos or being creative in any other outlet, with any other outlet that you have, do you get like any sort of
I get super moody.
Yeah, withdrawal.
Do you know, like, I do need it. Even if it's like I say, even if nothing comes of it, just the act of doing it is enough.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so that's a really interesting thing. Just to pounce quickly on that.
Okay.
So, do you know about this like idea of flow? So like, you've definitely had it at some point, I'm certain, like where you go in and the idea is writing itself, and you look at the clock and suddenly like 8 hours have gone, and you're in like this weird meditative state where suddenly you end up with a tune and you couldn't tell anybody how you made it because it just all came together. So do you do it? Do you go to the studio and go to be creative sometimes just to achieve that state, or just to, like you said a minute ago, just to go through the motions? Or does it have to have an end result from that time you've invested in? Do you see what I mean?
No, it doesn't always have to have an end result. I think just kind of, that's why I love messing around with guitar pedals and things like that. I just like creating tones and hearing them and listening to them, and hearing what I can do and what's possible, and occasionally I'll record things down and be like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Maybe I'll do something with that. But a lot of the time, I don't necessarily. I don't go in always go into the studio with the intent of creating something to get to a finished goal. But again, like you were saying, that kind of like, into that meditative state. Sometimes you do just go in there and that happens and it takes over, and you're not sure what's driving it, it's almost like every choice that you make seems to be the right choice. Do you, do you know what I mean?
I know.
So it's almost like something else is driving you, controlling you.
It is a crazy thing. It's like, I was listening to this other podcast. It's the Blind Boy podcast. If you've not listened to it, it's the first few episodes are amazing, but there's so many, and it started in 2017, so I've barely caught up. But he talks a little bit about flow, and about how he achieved flow when he was writing his book, and he talks about how when you're in that sort of flow state of creating, that your ego's gone and there's no critical voice there saying this is fucking great or this is fucking shit. So, and as soon as that voice starts to creep in, that's when you get into trouble, because you know how I said, I think we were talking about this earlier before we started the conversation about reacting to external critics, but then you've also got your internal mind saying, is this good or isn't this good? And like, I wonder where that factors in for you, and how quickly maybe you start to be critical of what you're doing, or whether you're able to allow yourself to just continue down an indulgent creative path before that voice comes in.
I think I do as much as possible. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I don't like work. I've obviously, it's silly things like distractions of like, whether it's the internet or someone sent you a tune, and that's enough to kind of distract you, pull you out of that meditative state. Do you know what I mean? And that's where I used to have this thing, even like with weed, and when I used to smoke weed, and it was like, used to get into that, helped me get into that stage, and I thought it did. And then it's that thing of like the next day you go back and listen to it, and I'm like, what the hell is this nonsense?
So, so alternative states help you, or get you into a different mind state. But I guess actually, I think I asked you this at the beginning, and I wonder now if we've had a bit more of a chat, if you know more of an answer. But say when you used to smoke weed and that got you into a sort of confident, creative mindset, what have you replaced that with, or what facet of your personality or your mood or whatever on any given day do you know has to be a certain way, or what coffee do you have to have had for breakfast or whatever before you can feel confident about or feel in the right mindset to go and do that thing?
Oh, it's really hard nowadays. I think
it could be as simple as like, do you have a routine, for example? It could be that simple.
Yeah, I do. I think, do you know what it is? I think it's like I think the tunes where I truly let go is almost at the points where I don't have to worry about anything else around me, like my family. It's almost like they're asleep. That's the time when I can do things, but I can only do that for so long. Do you know what I mean? Or for so many days a week, or it all catches up with me because I got to get the boy up and ready for school.
Yeah.
But when I do those kind of sessions, they are quite productive in that sense.
So when you know that all your other obligations are taken care of, sort of thing.
Yeah. So there is that kind of sort of physical freedom to be able to like, right, I can truly indulge in what's going on in front of me. You have to kind of almost like finding those times and spaces are kind of important. So I think what it is, where I've got to now is like in the times in the day where I have these certain hours in the day, I almost like there's like preparation in some respects of like finding sounds and learning bits of equipment and like finding a nice routing of pedals, and so you kind of trying things out. You almost sort of like mixing sounds and mixing colors and seeing what, okay, that's pretty cool. I'll mentally jot that down and do that. for that later, that period where you've got that total freedom to be able to then implement all those kind of little ideas that you've come up with.
So you're basically doing the groundwork before you do the actual work, sort of thing.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you like have any hard and fast or sort of like go-to things that you would do if you were stuck creatively? Like, say you're, I don't know, stuck for an idea, like you're in the tune maybe, or like maybe you're not, maybe you've got nothing. Is there like processes or maybe things you do where you might take a break or anything, I guess, that you might do to help get you moving?
Is there... No, no, I don't think so. I don't know. I almost like I haven't... Not that I can sit there and think about that I do. I think... the problem, the situation I'm in at the moment now is kind of like I've got a hell of a lot of equipment.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've got this thing of like, right, I know, I've got all these great things, but in some ways they're kind of getting in my way at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think it's like I've seen it where it's affected other people. It's like all the gear and no idea, that old adage. Do you know what I mean? It's like I think it's like finding something that works for you, which is why I found that Bitwig works for me, because it allows me to mess around with all my outboard creativeness and record it quickly and easily and have it there. Do you know what I mean? To come back to. And the same with like the Electron Digitac. I think that's where I feel like a lot of my bass ideas have been coming from that as well, because creatively it's a really creative machine because of its limitations, weirdly.
Limitation is, for me, is one of the most important and most powerful tools for creativity for me, but I'm not saying it's for everybody.
No, I think it is. It definitely is. And if I look back over, because as well as there's moments like when I look back over my career and kind of like, what did I do to get to that place, or what was I, using to get to that place? And it wasn't like I didn't have all this shit. Do you know what I mean? So it's like it's nice that I've got it all, but don't let it get it in the way of getting on with what you need to get on with. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you can just use a laptop. Do you know what I mean? And the sampler.
I think that's the thing, like with what we were talking about earlier with the technical and the sort of like mix element. There's so many different ways to skin a cat, and there's so many different parameters that you can fiddle with, that I feel like it almost becomes a barrier to actually just finishing an idea. Since I bought all the Electron gear, it's my go-to. So when I'm stuck, I'll just go and sit by this thing, not look at the computer. I don't save the patch. I won't, I'll record it as audio and I'll get it in, and that's it. And it's just, for me, mentally, it's like it clears that headspace of editing capability. It's like, that is what it is now. I'm happy-ish.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for it to be absolutely perfect. I'm looking for it to just do what I roughly want it to do. I rarely go in and I think I need to make a sound that's exactly like this, and rarely do I ever achieve exactly what I want. It's more I'm a slave to the process of making, rather than this is the idea in my head and it's exactly how I thought of it. It's more like, and I guess actually that's what I would ask you is like, do you go in with concepts, or do you are you more just sort of to the process? You're like more like you just go through and make decisions as you're moving through. I guess that's like a closed question. I guess it's like, what do you are you a slave to the process, or do you have like a concept, or is it somewhere in between, or how does that look?
No, I definitely go in with a concept in mind, in the sense of like, okay, at least like, well, what BPM am I going to work at today?
Okay.
What tempo are we going to, travel at? Where I'm not sort of like classically trained as such, do you know what I mean? In terms of like keys and chords and scales and whatnot, that bugs me. And but it's weird. Like, I've been doing it for so long that I could have done something about it, but I've chosen not to.
But you could look at it the other way, that you don't have that that sort of those restrictions on you in terms of. I've worked, you've probably worked with people who are classically trained, and they're like, oh no, you can't go to that chord from there because it's not right. Where actually it's like, well, why not?
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
and I think that's where like, almost like where I've kind of like the art of sampling, and sampling has always been a big part of what it is that I do, where I like piecing samples together that may not work in a sort of in a traditional sense, but do to me. Do you know what I mean? So that's what, and I think where I almost like why I still almost like started buying Sims is kind of like, well, I can't keep sampling people. Let me let me do it myself.
Yeah.
But the problem is, I'm not good at that. Do you know what I mean?
You're not good at what?
So, of creating those chords that I want to sample. But what I am good at is hearing something within what someone else has done, and that will sound good if I do this with it and pair it with this.
I think like that's quite interesting that you've just said that, because I think a lot of people would know you for your synth work. I think like your newest records are very synth heavy. They're you on synths, aren't they? They're not samples, are they?
Yeah, no, yeah, they are. You're right, but I listen to, I do sometimes listen, and I listen, check my old stuff, and I do miss sampling. Do you know what I mean? I do miss that aspect of it.
See, I think the reason why I can accept samples more than stuff that I've played myself is because you can't change the imperfections in the sample, where you'll always beat yourself up about a performance part of a synth part that you played. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'd be like, that sounds a bit like how I wanted it to be, but not perfect. And you can like accept imperfection because it's that limitation of working with the sample. You can't change much about it, but with all the synth parts you can. And so the fact that you haven't, or that you're having to live with an actual imperfection that is just of your making, that makes it more difficult. But I think, and that actually leads on to like an interesting part of it, I guess, which is about how people respond to your work versus what you think. So you listen to your synth stuff and you hear imperfection, or you don't think you're very good at it, where most other people would listen to it and think, shit, that fucking sounds great. And like, you always have that more intimate insight into what the process was behind it, and therefore you add more weight to the imperfection. And so I guess, like, does that make it difficult for you then if you are not happy, or like you've had to sort of, you spot an imperfection in a tune that you made, does it bother you when people respond positively to those? Do you find it hard to accept like positive praise about a track that you see imperfection in?
Yeah, well, yeah. It's like those ones it's like that kind of thing of like where the tunes that only take 3-4 hours to make are the ones that everyone responds to, and that kind of bugs you because you feel like you put no real effort into it. Do you know what I mean?
It is irritating, though, isn't it? Yeah,
it's super irritating. But maybe it's that kind of like everything's converged into this kind of 3 hours of perfection that you don't realize that you've done.
It's funny that I was so in the process of sort of getting my act together, thinking about how I wanted these conversations to be and what they're about. I had loads of conversations with my dad, because he used to be art and design teacher. He's a super like creative type, I guess you would say. And I met up with him in Hastings, and we went for a coffee, and one of his friends came down who was a painter, and we were talking about she was saying that some of the paintings she's most proud of are the ones that came out and flowed and were done in 2 hours. And then those are the ones that most people respond to, than the ones she's really had to slog over for hours and hours and hours that took a long time to feel complete. And I guess that speaks to like the relationship of the creator to the work. So I'll give you an idea of what I'm thinking about this, and you can give me yours. So there's tunes of mine that I wrote in next to no time, workforce tunes, spectral soul tunes that came together super, super quick, that I love. And I love them for their simplicity and the fact that I don't really remember how they came about, and they came about that quickly. And there's tunes that I spent hours and hours and hours, days and days and days, that will never connect with anyone, that really don't have much about them, that I just have that extra attachment to because I spent that much more time on them. So I wonder where the process of making for you relates to how you feel about the result at the end. So I wonder if a positive making experience or a negative making experience, or like a long and protracted making experience versus a short and free-flowing making experience, has an effect on how you think of the result, I guess is the way I would ask it.
I'm trying to think if it honestly does. Because it's almost like the journey of, you know, all those moments of, on all those times of spending hours and hours of doing something. You know, I've kind of like, I've got X amount of years under my belt, kind of thing, of like making tunes. It's almost like all of those long moments that led to nothing in some respects are like training in some ways to those 2-3 hours of moments coming together. Do you know what I mean? I think it's almost like that. When I say that, kind of like, it bugs me that those tunes that I spent 2-3 hours on, those are the ones that I like. It doesn't mean I don't like them. It just bugs. It's almost like it's bugged me that it only took me that long to do it. But when I think about it, it's like, well, no. It's almost like all those 8-hour sessions or X amount hour sessions have all led up to that moment.
So all the hours you put in before are the things that people don't see, and then the result is the thing you made in 3 hours. And people are like, well, how the fuck did you make that in 3 hours? And you're like, well, because I spent 20 years making 20 other, like, thousands of other ideas that never came out. I guess what I'm trying to get at, like, I wonder if, and I don't want these sort of chats to always be like my experience versus the person I'm talking to, but I guess, like, I can be super proud of stuff where, if there's a tune that I've finished that at a certain point I hated or didn't think it was right, and I got there in the end, I can look back at it and think, fuck, I'm so glad that I made that one work, because I really like it now, because I had to spend ages getting it to the point of... I
sometimes think maybe I don't have that closer connection in some respects, because it's like everything's within the moment. Do you know what I mean? I don't sort of reflect on it in that sense, because it did for me what I needed it to do at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And I've moved on to this new problem within myself that I have to contend with.
So do you feel like not that connected to what you're making then, or
I feel like that. I feel not that connected in the sense that I can listen to a tune that I did like a year ago and not have any idea on how I did it, or how I was able to do something within it. Do you know what I mean? Like, how the hell did I do that?
Yeah.
What was the process? Do you know what I mean?
So
it's almost like,
but that is the magic of it, isn't it? Like, that's I love that. I love where people ask you how you made something, and you're like, I've got no idea how I did that. I really don't know. I think people think there's an answer for everything, and that's what is so mystical about process and about creative process for me, is like that there is so much. Even when you are the person making it, there's a mysticism about how you made it and how you got into the headspace to make it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there like I said, there are no sort of answers. I think it's like you say, you kind of what you're getting at. There is mind states that you get into, and then later on down the line, you know, you get people trying to kind of like reverse engineer or kind of get an understanding of what did that person do to get to that state, and then they don't even know themselves. It's like it's, you know, like. It's not necessarily being done in some kind of magical way, but it's being done in a way which is pleasing to that person's ear. Do you know what I mean? And they get to that point where they're like, yeah, I'm happy with that. And that's where I think, you know, people's sounds come from, whether that person has a sound because that's what they're tuned to, that's what they like. Do you know what I mean? And that's how you can define what it is that they do.
Yeah.
Which I think is important. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I agree.
So I can tell your tunes.
Yeah,
I can tell Skeppy's tunes.
I can tell yours as well.
It's not a case of like.
But to be honest, I couldn't tell you what they are. You know, like I couldn't say what the sound is. People have always said to me like, oh, I can tell a Spectral Soul tune, and I'm like, well, wow, like they're really broad and different sounding. like different genres within the genre sort of thing. So I always think and I can never put my finger on it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you're just sort of looking at it from a perspective of kind of like, oh, well, that's a roller, that's liquid, that's or simplifying it in some senses.
Yeah.
But you're putting this extra part of yourself into it. That's creating this piece of music into this subgenre. Do you know what I mean? But it's ultimately it's you and your choices and decisions that have got it to that place. Trying to kind of sort of pinpoint that essence is it's very difficult.
I was reading this thing where it was like, so I had to do it when I was thinking about these conversations and laying out the podcast idea. Is to, if you can't think about what it is you want it to be, you can start to think about what it isn't, and that helps you to refine the definition of what it is that you want to do. And that was really important to me, actually, in terms of this, is that I knew I needed to sort of prepare, and I will leave this in the edit, fuck it, because I think people need to know like how the process works. Like, it was really important to me that even though I knew there had to be a certain amount of research behind this in terms of knowing roughly what I wanted to get out of the conversations and what I didn't really want to spend too much time on, so I think it's really important that people listening don't feel like there's a right and a wrong answer or that they're being preached to.
No,
it's more
not at all.
It's more just like, I want to explore ideas with like-minded people and get people can chip in with their thoughts, and we can go back to them in other conversations. And I just think the whole thing can be a process of trying to sort of define and work out the best ways to do what we do, or what we're struggling with. And it's all about just like communicating ideas and also for people to be able to make sense of what they're doing, like through just talking about it helps people to make sense about what their goals are and what they want to do,
Yeah, exactly. I think like some of the things I've said throughout this conversation, I'm sure people have answers to, but I don't necessarily want them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't. It's like this is my process to get into where I want to get to personally, and it's like when I do a new project, I kind of like, you start with an idea, and then if you think about the end product before you've even started it, it's just gonna get in the way. All of that kind of stuff will come, and it will come naturally, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm sure as you'll go along, you're gonna kind of like, okay, well, I could have recorded this better, but cool. But we've had the conversation, and it's there, and you can move on. So I think that those are all kind of creative decisions. Do you know what I mean? Just
it's all a process of getting to a better result. So all of it. So you have to start somewhere, and there's never going to be a great time to crack on, and it's always going to be. There's always going to be something you could do better. So it's you just have to sort of start. With regards to goals, it's funny you just said that, because I've literally, one of the notes I've got down here is actually a quote from a book, and I think I'll just read it out verbatim. I might not leave it in, but it's interesting. And it just says, a goal defines the outcome. When you have a goal, the route to it becomes a labour, and the imagination becomes closed to all other possibilities. If the process is interesting, the result will be interesting. So it's like, that's why I asked you about sort of going in with a set idea of what you want to achieve, or whether you just go in and allow your mood to dictate and the process to dictate the outcome. Because I think it's quite interesting to know, like, because, for example, when I was at university and I did graphic design, they'd give you a brief, and if you immediately just think, you think of a result first and then you work the process to get there, it's ultimately a shitter result than if you just allow yourself to go through the actual process itself, and it creates a more interesting outcome by allowing the process to dictate the right end. And that's all.
I think the goal, I consider the goal in terms of like, what is it that I want to do, and then it's like, then okay, what's the initial step to getting? What's the initial step to get on that process of getting to that goal. I don't. It's like you have the start and end points, and I don't think about the in between. Do you know what I mean? I think it's sometimes, yeah. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit contradictory. It's kind of like, it's like, for example, when I did played at the Caliber night. It's like, right, I want to write a couple tunes that I can play for that night. So that's when I went into the studio with that in mind.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, and those are the first sort of drum and bass tunes that I've written in a long time. And already it's like someone wants to sign them. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, okay, but so it's like there was an end goal, and that was the result. That was the goal that I was aiming for. So I kind of, I suppose, went through the motions to get to or the process to get to that goal. But on any other time when I go into the studio, it isn't. I don't think about those goals or think about the end result in that sense. I think I work. I personally work well with goals in mind, but not. I don't really care too much about how I get there.
Yeah, but I think a goal is such a broad term because, for example, a goal could be, I want to have an album. It could be a deadline, for example, rather than an amount that you need to fulfill. So it's not like a goal could be, today I just want to get one drum break that sounds great by the end of it, or it could be as big as, I think by the end of this year or next year I'd like to have this in place, and they are important to form the framework of what you're doing. And also as a freelancer, as a self-employed person, if you don't have goals, you sometimes feel a bit in the wind. I certainly do. I feel a bit like I can be down if I don't have. I actually get quite down when I finish a project. Like when I hand the masters over, I feel like shit. Like what next? And I can find that quite difficult. So it is good to have goals, but obviously it's towing the line between a goal that restricts your ability to be the best version of you. God, that sounds like a Instagram, like, do you know what I mean? Like a goal that like restricts your abilities and a goal that really focuses your abilities and what you're doing. But then it's like, at what point have you given yourself too tough a goal or a goal that's restricting you? And I don't know, it's hard, isn't it? It's like you need them, but you don't want them.
I don't. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to. Sitting here talking to you and actually critically thinking about it, I think maybe I do work better with those things in mind. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and all these times, I think all these times in between are maybe leading up to that. Do you know what I mean? Like the possibility of the end result and the process of how I'm going to get there is what's exciting for me.
It's funny how it can be either self-fulfilling and self-perpetuating or self-defeating and absolutely destroy everything. It's like, a good day can create 10 more good days and a bad day can create 10 more bad days. I guess actually a big part of this from a personal standpoint, all these talks and like me actually thinking it through, is to have a better understanding myself, but also to see whether I'm just crazy and the way that it works for me is not the same for everyone else, like. So I feel like mentality is just such a big part of being a creative person. Like I wonder like about other people's dynamics about how their mentality works in terms of, like I just said, like a good day can breed 10 more and a bad day can be like, the month's over and you get no more done. It's just such a big factor for me in terms of.
I think what will be interesting with this is talking to people who are at different levels within what we do, so to speak, or speaking to someone who is really successful and the pressures of the pressures of the creative process for them.
Don't you think that you're pretty successful and you're doing that now? You're talking through the pressures of what you feel on a day-to-day.
Yeah, but I'm almost like, but my sense is like I don't have to please anyone other than myself. Do you know what I mean? Whereas they've got an added pressure of having to please people. That that kind of pressure and that kind of getting in the way of my creativity, it was like would freak me out.
Yeah, I mean, this is a side of the discussion we haven't even touched on. Maybe we could quickly is like where the art meets the industry, and sort of, I guess it's something I've thought about really, is like where we find as creative people our value and our place, and like how the ecosystem of like making creative stuff that you think's good or that you want to present comes up against the real world sort of situation of it needing to sell or needing to be popular, or
Well, that gets in the way of things. It's like, and it kind of like you hear it on a daily basis where it sounds condescending, but a creative person comes up with an idea that sounds great and everyone really likes, and then everyone's like, oh shit, how can I want to do a version of that, which is, ultimately just trying to monetize that one great idea.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? So then that's where the industry gets involved in the sense of like wanting to monetize great ideas.
Yeah. And it's required for you to be able to afford to make more great ideas. But then it's the same with what we've said. I think it's with every aspect that we've talked about today, it's like the balance of everything. It's like you have got to pay the bills if you want to carry on being able to go to the studio and create nice ideas. You have to make not sacrifices, but you do have to think about how these ideas exist in the real world and how they're valued.
I think if it came down to it, though, what I know that I'm even within myself, like if I suddenly wasn't getting booked anymore, or I wasn't DJing, I'd be okay with that in the sense of like, I'm not afraid to go out and get a 9-to-5 job. Do you know what I mean? If that's what I've got to do to kind of to provide for my family, but that doesn't mean the music would still always be there. Do you know what I mean? My studio will still be here in some form or another, providing me with the outlet that I need. Do you know what I mean? It's just that I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can let you almost like drip feed out some of my creativity to kind of to fund my life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because what you do is thought of as valuable to a lot of people, and therefore they want to support what you do to allow you to do more. Do you know what I mean? And that's that's, I guess, it in a nutshell, isn't it? It's like, do you ever think about like where your value lies and like what you're contributing? Do you know what I mean? Like, God, this is such another sort of, it sounds really grandiose, but like your position in terms of what you offer to like the world.
The only way, I think I've said it before, the only way it ever really impacts on me is this kind of like the selfish idea of like leaving my mark in some way. Do you know what I mean? I like the idea of that, I think.
Yeah.
Of long after I'm gone, there's a record of me somewhere. Do you know what I mean? The legacy of it, I suppose, of my existence.
Okay. That leads me, I guess, into probably the second to last question, which is, okay. Would you say then that legacy and making a mark is what success looks like to you? And if not, then what does success look like to you as a creative person?
Success. What does success look like?
I think we have touched on this a little bit because you said that the goal is to be happy, and I think you could talk about success in the sense of personal achievement and personal well-being, but also what you want to achieve from your career. And I guess if I was just going on what you've said today, you've said that you want to be happy, and you are, and that you want to leave a mark. And, I would say that you have, because you've done something that lots of people wish they could do and haven't. But is there anything else that you would say would be important that you might have already achieved, or that you want to achieve?
I think it's shifted now, whereas my successes and my goals, in terms of my creativity, aren't necessarily about me anymore. Now that I have children, do you know what I mean? It's like they're almost like that's my next creative endeavor. Do you know what I mean? It's like the choices that I make and the things that I do will have a direct impact on the kind of person they grow up to be.
So do you feel like you have a responsibility then to be true to yourself and sort of actually what would you like to pass on, I guess, would be the better question, is what attributes about what you do you think would be important to pass on to your kids, if that's what you think would be your idea of success?
It's like this idea of, the whole thing of my tagline, true to the craft, is that kind of idea of kind of like of recognizing sort of honesty and integrity in others. Do you know what I mean? And having that yourself and doing things for the right reasons. There's a theme of kind of honesty, integrity, compassion, empathy, love. I don't know. I'm just not being very articulate with what I'm trying to say.
I think you are. I think you are. I really like this idea. Obviously, I don't have kids, but I have thought about. Like, would I be able to not do what I do now if it meant, if financially I couldn't. I mean, what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is, could I ever give up what I do now, just to make more money to satisfy financial needs for kids? Or is it a balance between you being a happy person and fulfilled person, and unfortunately being afflicted by the addiction of having to make stuff for a living, versus being able to support a family? And I feel like you've sort of nailed it there by saying that the ideals that you work towards with your creative stuff, that's what you want to pass on, and that's what you kind of see as success. And I guess that's that's kind of not even what I meant when I asked the question. But it's a more interesting answer, because I asked it from a selfish sort of probably egotistical point of view, is like, what would you see as a successful end to, or achievement throughout your career? And I just like the idea that you've brought it back to like a more holistic, ideological thing.
Yeah, it is. I know it is. Do you know what I mean? But it's like, because I think, like I say, I look at my upbringing and what I went through, and it's that kind of thing. You don't want to, like, you only want the best for your children and the best for your kids. So it's like, it is almost like when I look at my studio, and for me, in a weird way in my head, it's just on loan at the minute for me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? At some point, but I would never try and force them into it. No. But it's there if they want it. They were there if they want it. But yeah, I think it I think also from a personal point of view, I've always gravitated towards people who are creatively minded. Do you know what I mean? Or
why do you think I want to have these conversations? Do you see what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's because
there is that they've got that same. Maybe they've got that understanding of how your brain's wired,
and they've got the same struggle. They're having exactly the same struggle, really, in terms of finding a place in the world, finding a balance with their lifestyle and the other needs that they want from life, like a family and all that other stuff. And you're constantly sort of battling demons, aren't you? It sounds awful, and it's not as sort of bad as that. It's more just like, you're sort of dealing with shit that other people don't. I don't know. That sounds like ridiculous as well, because everyone has their battles. But I just think, you're sort of wired slightly differently, I guess, and you've put yourself in this precarious job environment, so you know how quickly things can turn to shit, or how quickly your mood can change. So, all right, cool. Look, we've been talking for over 2 hours. Thanks so much. I think we've covered so much, and also I feel like we've gone to some places that I didn't think actually that we would go, and I think what's going to be so interesting really about all these conversations is that everyone builds on the one before. So I can take new perceptions that you've given me and new perspectives you've given me, and take them into further conversations.
Well, no, it's good. I mean, I've enjoyed it. It's just kind of like it's that having to sort of think about what it is that I do isn't something I've done. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, and I know I'm not, like I say, I'm not necessarily the most articulate with what I'm in expressing my thoughts in that way. But it was good. No, I've enjoyed having this chat, and it's made me sort of, in some ways, it's something that I've been thinking about as well. Kind of like when I sit in my studio and I'm sort of surrounded by all this stuff, it's like, well, do I need half of this? Do you know what I mean? Little things like that. Like what's working out what's getting in the way. Do you know what I mean? And I think this is where these conversations that you're going to have with people are good, where you can kind of in some ways like answer some of those questions and see what's getting in people's ways.
It's a really powerful way of making sense of what you do, because you have to put it through the filter of your brain and then talk about it, which makes it real. It's like the basis of all talk therapies, isn't it? Once you make sense of a thought in your brain and you say it, you either know it's right or know it's wrong by how it feels when you say it. It's so weird. And I was talking about this with my dad a bit last week, and he made the point that by putting a process that is very abstract into words, it can help you make it more conscious, and it makes you like more present in the moment by being sort of more aware of what's going on and what the process that you're going through and like what you're dealing with. It's like that more sort of what do they call it, mindfulness kind of thing, where you're being more mindful about what you're doing. And
exactly.
I find everyone's process really interesting, and I find talking about it really interesting, and that's kind of it really. That was the goal for this, is really to either be a resource for people to listen to get ideas, and to see that everyone's having the same problems and struggles, and and not feel so like downtrodden or feel shit about what they're doing, and that everyone who's a creative has the same shit day in day out, don't they? So yeah. All right, cool. Well, nice. Thanks so much, Darren.